Hey guys, tonight we're slipping on a pair of dusty boots, brushing off that crusty tumbleweed in your mind, and riding straight into the sun-baked myths of the Old West. Can you hear the creak of old saddle leather? Smell the gunpowder drifting in the desert air? There's a coyote howling off in the distance, which might just be your stomach protesting against another can of beans. Welcome to the world of Whispering Jack, an outlaw so elusive, folks weren't even sure if he had a voice. But trust me, tonight he speaks. Now, let me be very clear. If you think the Wild West was just rugged charm and dashing duels, oh honey, you're about to get whiplash from reality. There was cholera in the water, teeth were optional, and justice was often a coin flip between hanging and high-fiving. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes, but hey, that's why we're just storytelling, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who's drifting off from where tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your name is Jack, and you are 6 years old. There's a storm outside, the kind that shakes your bones and sounds like 1,000 buffalo stampeding across your roof. You're curled up in the corner of your family's one-room cabin, which generously smells like wet dog, horse sweat, and burning pine. Your pa's out back trying to save a dying pig, and your ma is spooning out mush for dinner with a look that could curdle milk. It's 1858, somewhere in the Kansas Territory, and survival is less about thriving and more about not dying before breakfast. You grow up quick out here. You learn to shoot before you learn to read, which is fine because there are more rattlesnakes than books anyway. Your hands are calloused by 10, your eyes sharp as a hawk's, and your voice, well, that's the odd part. You don't talk much. You whisper. Always have. Maybe it was the fever you had as a baby, maybe it's nerves, or maybe it's just your way of being invisible. Outlaws don't get caught if no one remembers what they sound like. Historians still argue whether the Wild West was ever truly wild or just lawless and underfunded. But for you, little Jack, it's wild enough. You've seen a man shot for cheating at poker and another for just looking the wrong way at a preacher's daughter. And that was just a Thursday. There's a neighbor boy named Silas who once claimed his uncle lost a toe in a duel over a borrowed shovel. Your pa said it was hogwash, but your ma laughed, so you believed it. People did weird things out here, like saving hair clippings for luck, or hanging dead crows on their doors to ward off tax collectors, or was it witches? Honestly, maybe both. And even at 6, you know this world ain't fair. You watch your parents break their backs to scratch life from dirt while drifters ride through town with gold teeth and whiskey breath. You're starting to understand that justice has a price tag. And yours? Well, it's about a nickel and a clean getaway.
You're 10 years old now, and you've started sleeping in the barn. Not because you have to, but because you want to. There's a peace out there between the straw and creaking rafters, away from the constant sighing of your ma and the clinking cough of your pa. The horses don't judge, especially Bess. Bess is an old Appaloosa with a back like a rocking chair and a suspicious amount of wisdom in her left eye. She's not yours, not technically, but you whisper to her every night like she's your soul confessor. She knows all your secrets, where you hide your slingshot, which neighbor you stole corn muffins from, and what you really think about the town preacher's overstuffed sermons. He even taught her to nod when you ask, "You think I'll be somebody?" That's where the nickname starts. Whisperin' Jack. It begins as a joke. The blacksmith's boy blurts it out one day after you scare him half to death slipping through the churchyard with barely a sound. But the name sticks like burrs in a horse's mane. Eventually, even your ma starts calling you that with a smirk that says both hard-headed fool and my boy. It's also around this time that you witness your first real robbery. The general store gets hit one night, and folks say it was the Tillman boys from over the ridge, but you know better. You saw a shadow move with grace and purpose, not the drunk stagger of those two moonshine-loving dimwits. You never told anyone. Even then, something in you respected the artistry of it. Frontier towns weren't exactly known for investigative rigor. If someone went missing or something got stolen, there was a shrug, a spit, and sometimes a bullet. Most people kept their mouths shut and their rifles loaded. Justice came in boots, not books. Historians still argue whether local sheriffs were brave enforcers or glorified thugs with shiny stars. You start practicing, not just shooting tin cans, but moving without sound, picking up stories from drifters at the saloon window. You listen more than you speak. It's the whisper that makes folks lean in, makes them underestimate you. And you lean into that. Here's a quirky thing you pick up. Some of the older cowhands believe if you hang your boots upside down after sundown, it keeps ghosts from crawling into them. You try it. Once. Then best choose a hole in one, and that's that. But back to the barn. One night, you wake up to a lightning strike so bright it carves the whole sky open like a jack-o'-lantern. And in that glow, you see a man leaning against the far wall, calm as Sunday. He tips his hat and says nothing. You blink, and he's gone. You never tell anyone. Was he real? Or just a dream stitched from silence and shadow? You never find out. Still, you whisper about him to Bess. Every night for a year.
14 is a rough year. You're tall now, lean like a fence post and twice as splintered. Your voice hasn't changed, still soft, still whispery, but now it carries something different. People listen when you speak, not because you're loud, but because they're afraid they'll miss something important. And you've started carrying a pistol. It's not fancy, rusted along the barrel, the grip cracked like old barnwood, and it misfires about 1 time in 4, but it's yours. Found it under the floorboards of an abandoned cabin while chasing a runaway calf. No one saw you take it, no one even knew it was there, except the old skeleton in the corner. You left him his boots and hat. Fair trade. You don't shoot much, bullets cost more than bread, but you practice drawing, over and over, till your hand knows the motion better than your brain. You start to feel something stir, like you're meant for more than cow pies and winter starvation. Then, it happens. Your first real fight. You're in town with your pa, helping load sacks of flour onto the wagon. There's a ruckus in the saloon, surprise, surprise, and a man stumbles out, bleeding from his nose, face wild with fury. He sees you, or rather, he sees your pa's Winchester slung over the wagon side. He grabs it. You don't think, just move. By the time the man's finger touches the trigger, your pistol's out. It's not loud, it coughs like a sick dog, but the shot hits his shoulder and spins him like a toppling fence post. He screams, not from pain, okay, probably from pain, but from surprise. Because who expects a 14-year-old to shoot first? Your pa doesn't say a word, just stares. The sheriff hauls the man off. No thanks, no praise, just more staring. It's the kind of look that says, I didn't raise you to be that fast, but now that you are, I don't know what to do with you. That night, you sleep in the barn again. You don't talk to Bess. You just lie there, watching shadows crawl across the rafters, wondering if that was the beginning of something or the end of something else. Here's your historical fact for the night. Duels, while technically illegal in many territories, were still pretty common in the West until the late 19th century. But most weren't the clean 10 paces and turns sort. They were messy, fueled by whiskey and pride, and usually over something deeply stupid. Historians still argue whether most of these confrontations were bravado-driven bluffs or genuine attempts at resolving disputes with bullets. And then there's the fringe stuff, like the belief that painting a red X on your holster kept your gun hand from being possessed by vengeful spirits. Probably didn't help accuracy, but at least it made your belt look exciting. In town, the whispers start. Not just your voice this time. You. Whispering Jack. The kid who shot a grown man without blinking. Some folks look at you different now. Some with fear, some with something worse. Admiration. That's the first taste of the outlaw's drug. Not the money, not the loot. The myth. And it's strong.
17 hits like a gut punch. By now, you've grown into your bones, all sharp angles and quiet fury. You've taken up riding with a small crew of misfits, 3 boys and 1 girl, all barely older than you, and every one of them hungrier than a coyote in January. Not hungry for food, mind you, though, that too, but for reputation, for rebellion, for something more than scraping by. They call themselves the Ash Knuckle Gang, which admittedly sounds cooler than it deserves. You picked the name after burning a pile of splintered fence posts and someone got branded by accident. It stuck. Like most of your plans, it wasn't clever, but it sure was loud. You start small. Horse swaps, midnight poker cheats, the occasional lifted crate from a slow-moving wagon. And honestly, it's kind of fun. The thrill, the danger, the way your name spreads like spilled whiskey on a dry floor. Whispering Jack and his Ash Knuckle Gang. You like how it sounds. People flinch when you walk into a saloon now. And not just because you haven't bathed in a week. But then you go too far. There's a stagecoach heading out from Dawson's Mill with payroll money for the railroad crew. It's not guarded, or so you think. Turns out, the coach driver is ex-cavalry and still has good aim with a scattergun. The job goes south fast. One of your boys, Tanner, takes buckshot to the ribs and doesn't get back up. You drag him behind a mesquite bush, hand clamped to his chest, whispering nonsense to calm him. He's still. Too still. You've never seen someone die like that. It ain't dramatic. No last words. Just a long blink that never finishes. Historians still argue whether frontier gangs had any kind of code, or if it was just a free-for-all of survival. Some say there were unspoken rules, like never robbing churches or hurting women and kids. Others argue those were later inventions, myths meant to soften the rough edges for dime novels and bored city folk. There's a weird superstition you hear from a gravedigger in Slatetown. He says if you die while lying westward, your soul gets stuck in limbo. Ever since, you check which way bodies are facing, even your enemies. You can't help it. After Dawson's Mill, things change. The gang splinters, and guilt clings like sand in your boots. And you stop whispering to Bess. She's long gone now. Traded for food and a new saddle. You still feel bad about that. You start riding solo more often, thinking too much and sleeping too little. Your legend's growing, but you're shrinking inside it. The coat gets heavier, the silence louder. And still,
you don't stop.
The sun over the salt flats doesn't just beat down, it punishes. You ride into it anyway, because you've got nowhere else to go and a long trail of mistakes behind you. The ground is blinding white, crusted with centuries of dried tears and broken promises. And somewhere out here, in this endless shimmer, a man named Reuben Calder is waiting to kill you. He sent word by way of a whiskey runner, come alone or don't come at all. And for some reason, probably guilt or maybe just curiosity, you listened. You slow your horse at the edge of a cracked basin, the air trembling with heat. Your shirt clings to your skin and your mouth tastes like dust and regret. Reuben's silhouette waits near an outcropping of stone, arms folded, no gun in sight, but you know better. You dismount and walk the last 100 yards, your boots sinking just slightly into the powdery crust. He doesn't speak at first, just stares. You were friends once, back before the Ash Knuckle Gang, back before the blood and betrayal. He was there when Tanner died, watched it happen from a distance, and never forgave you for surviving. I should shoot you, he says finally. You nod. Fair. But I figure maybe I'll just let the sun do it. The two of you stand there in a silence so thick it might as well be a storm. Then, slowly, he tosses you a canteen. You catch it, cold metal against your burning hand. The piece lasts about 30 seconds. That's when the ambush happens. Gunfire cracks like splitting ice. 2 rifles from the ridge. Maybe Reuben set you up, maybe he didn't. You don't have time to find out. You dive, roll, draw. Your shoulder hits salt so hard it scrapes the skin raw. You fire blind, feel the air ripple as a bullet zips past your cheek. You and Reuben end up back to back behind a chunk of sun-baked rock, both panting, both bleeding, because he did get clipped right above the knee. His eyes meet yours, and for a heartbeat, you remember stealing apples together as kids. Then you both start shooting. Historians still argue whether loyalty among outlaws was genuine camaraderie or just a business arrangement with better hats. Some point to famous duos who died together in shootouts. Others note how often one partner sold the other out for a lighter sentence and a warm meal. Oh, and here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some frontier folks believed gunpowder mixed with chili pepper and smeared across wounds would ward off infection. It mostly just added an extra layer of screaming. You both survive, barely. The attackers, whoever they were, don't. By the end, your hands are shaking from heat and adrenaline. Reuben leans against you as you limp back to your horse, both of you too stubborn to say what needs saying. That was the day you learned something important. Glory dies fast in the sun, but regret walks with you, slow and steady.
You still wear the coat, that same old duster, dust-colored, bullet-scraped, torn at the elbow and smelling like a mix between saddle soap and revenge. It's less of a garment now, more of a timeline stitched into canvas. Folks whisper stories about it, that it's lucky, that it's cursed, that it once stopped the bullet that would have taken your heart. None of that's quite true, but not quite false either. You remember the night it got its first hole? Some nameless town, some forgettable poker game. You weren't even cheating for once. A sore loser decided the pot belonged to him and flipped the table. You were already walking out the door when the bullet caught your shoulder. It burned like betrayal and smelled like burned bacon grease. You didn't cry. You just clutched the wound, leaned against the water trough, and whispered curses under your breath. The kind of curses that sounded like prayer if you squinted your ears. The coat stayed with you through everything after that. Train jobs, bar fights, long lonely nights when the desert wind felt like it was trying to peel the skin from your bones. Over time, more holes appeared, some from gunfire, some from cactus needles, and one from an encounter with an overprotective goose. Don't ask. But you couldn't throw it away. That duster became your shield, your flag, your warning sign. Whispering Jack's silhouette against the setting sun, coat flapping, pistol low, head tilted like he already knew how this ends. Out west, people had their charms and talismans. A gambler in Laredo swore by a coin he'd stolen from a dead man's boot. A traveling preacher used a tooth carved from mesquite to divine truth. And you had your coat. Superstition or not, you never bled out while wearing it, and that counted for something. Historians still argue whether outlaws cultivated these kinds of myths on purpose, knew the value of image in a world driven by dime novels and barroom stories. Some say they leaned into legend making, feeding the fire just enough to keep the marshals guessing. Others insist they were just trying to survive, and the stories spun themselves. Either way, the coat helped. Once, a kid stopped you outside a general store. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Wide-eyed, dirt on his cheeks like war paint. "Are you really him?" he asked, pointing to the newspaper sketch in his hand. You nodded, then crouched beside him. "I thought you'd be taller," he said, and you almost laughed. Instead, you handed him my apple and walked on. You still think about that kid sometimes. Wonder if he grew up to be a lawman or a robber or something harder to define. Point is, the coat wasn't magic. It didn't stop bullets or make you faster, but it reminded you who you were pretending to be. And sometimes, that's enough to make it real.
The whiskey's bad. That's your first clue. You're sitting in a crooked chair at a crooked table in a town so forgettable even the coyotes skip it on their migration. The saloon's ceiling droops like a tired eyelid, and the piano's missing half its keys. But the gossip? Oh, the gossip is thriving. You swirl the drink. It smells like varnish and regret. You sip it anyway. The bartender, a wiry man with a limp and a permanent squint, watches you with the wariness of someone who's served one too many shootouts. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't have to. Your wanted poster arrived 2 days before you did. "Whispering Jack," he murmurs, more to himself than to you. "Thought you'd be taller." Yeah, that one never gets old. Your bounty has climbed. That much is clear by the way the room tenses when you reach for your glass. There's a gambler in the corner pretending to read a newspaper, a pair of ranch hands at the bar whispering too much, and someone behind you with the kind of stillness that only means, "I'm about to do something dumb." You sigh. This again. But before anyone moves, the door swings open. A breeze cuts through the room, carrying dust and something sharp underneath. Intent. A man steps in wearing a tan suit and a badge so clean it practically screams, "Paid for with bribes." Deputy Marsh from Carson Junction. Last time you saw him, he was trying to date your horse. Long story. He doesn't reach for his gun. He just nods at you and tips his hat. "Nice coat," he says. You nod back. And just like that, the tension breaks. Not disappears, no, just fractures into manageable pieces. People go back to pretending not to watch you. Marsh orders a drink, doesn't touch it, and sits 3 stools down. That's your warning. The law is sniffing around.
Here's your historical fact. Bounty hunting was a booming, if messy, business in the late 1800s. Posters were printed with rough sketches and loose facts, often exaggerating crimes to drum up public fear and reward money. Many bounty hunters were former outlaws themselves, switching sides for profit or survival. And for your fringe tidbit, some saloons were rumored to use rattlesnake venom in their house whiskey, claiming it inspired courage. More likely, it just explained the screaming. Back in your crooked chair, you count your exits. 2 doors, 1 window, and a trap door behind the bar you're almost certain leads to a room full of bootleg tobacco and rats named after presidents. You don't want trouble. Not tonight. But as you stand to leave, the gambler speaks up. Loud, deliberate. Hey, Jack, that bounty on your head, is it true you once robbed a train with just a slingshot and a stare? You smile, just a little. Only the slingshot, you whisper. Laughter bubbles up from the room. Nervous, awkward, but real. You walk out without drawing your gun. Sometimes survival isn't about being faster. It's about being the story folks want to hear again.
They call them the Pinkertons, but you've got other names. Ghost hounds, blood men, the smileless. Whatever the term, they aren't just lawmen, they're hunters. Paid, polished, and proud of it. And now, they're after you. The first time you notice them is subtle. A man in a crisp coat asks too many questions in a town where strangers usually get spat on. He carries a notebook instead of a pistol, but his eyes are sharp enough to cut rope. You see him at the general store, talking to the clerk with the shaky hands. Then again at the livery stable, chatting with the stable boy who hasn't been right since the mule incident. You slip out before sundown, but you know that face will follow you. Within a month, there's another. This one's got a gold tooth and a limp, but he tracks like a Comanche scout and smells like peppermint oil. You only catch sight of him when the wind shifts and carries the faintest click of boot to rock. You lose him near Black Hollow, but not before he leaves you a calling card, a spent bullet on your saddle horn, lodged gently, like a whispered promise. The Pinkertons weren't like local sheriffs. These were professionals. Former soldiers, detectives, some say even ex-outlaws who found steady work in chasing down their own. And in the 1870s, they were booming. Railroad companies, banks, even mayors with itchy nerves hired them to track and catch, or eliminate, troublemakers. Historians still argue whether the Pinkertons upheld law or simply corporate interests. After all, they were just as likely to bust unions as they were to chase bandits. Heroes to some, villains to others. What no one argues is how good they were at finding people who didn't want to be found. And here's your quirky tidbit. Pinkerton agents often carried hollowed-out walking canes containing knives or rolled-up warrants. Some even trained carrier pigeons to deliver messages back to headquarters. Yes, Whispering Jack, you may be an outlaw, but your enemies are bird people. Do with that what you will. You start changing your patterns. No more lingering in towns, no more trusting drifters. You sleep under overhangs and in riverbeds. Listen for silence more than noise. You whisper less, even to yourself. It's strange. Being hunted makes you feel more like prey than predator. You start to understand what it means to survive without being seen, to step where no track prints, to move without scent. One night you find a fire pit still warm, someone close, too close. They left a black-gloved fingerprint in the soot. You don't sleep that night. You don't sleep much after that. People talk about fame like it's freedom, but you're learning the hard truth. When the Pinkertons come knocking, the only thing your reputation earns you is more footsteps behind you in the dark.
The first time you hear about the ghost of Lone Mesa, you're crouched in a dry creek bed, chewing stale jerky and trying not to think about how badly you need a bath. The story drifts over from a group of cowboys camped up the ridge, half drunk, fully convinced. They say the ghost's a tall man in black, walks without leaving tracks, and whispers just like you. Folks claim he haunts the mesa at twilight, protecting some lost treasure or avenging a buried betrayal, depending on who's telling it. But here's the kicker. He only appears to people who've taken a life. Well, isn't that a fun little RSVP? You laugh under your breath until you realize you're heading to Lone Mesa. Your horse, new, gray, skittish, doesn't like the place. Neither do the birds. The whole mesa feels off, too quiet. You camp under a rock shelf and keep your revolver close, though you don't sleep much. At dawn, you spot the smoke first. Thin, controlled. Someone else is camped nearby. You approach slow, hand low, breath steady. When you reach the fire, you see him, a man in black, long coat, pale face, sitting calmly, poking at coals with a stick. And you don't know whether to shoot him or ask for an autograph. He looks up, nods, doesn't speak. Turns out this ghost is real. Real name, Elijah Grady, former outlaw. Went quiet a decade ago after faking his death. Lives up here alone now. Rumor kept people away, just the way he liked it. You sit, trade silence for silence. Eventually, he speaks. You got the look of a man who's done things he don't sleep well with. You don't answer. He offers you coffee. You accept. Over the next day you talk about regrets, about losing folks, about how sometimes you don't know if you're still running towards something or just away from everything else. He listens, doesn't judge, even tells you about a gang he once ran with until they burned a church. That was his line. Everyone's got one, he says. The trick is knowing when it's been crossed. Historians still argue whether reclusive outlaws like Elijah actually existed, or whether they were just ghost stories made up to scare greenhorns. But plenty of quiet ranches and hidden shacks tell a different tale of men who rode hard, then disappeared. Fringe tidbit time. Some cowboys believed that talking to a ghost out loud could give you insight into your own death. They'd sit out in graveyards during full moons, whispering questions into the wind. Creepy? Absolutely. But then again, so is living in a world where everything you own fits in one saddlebag. Before you leave, Elijah gives you something. A silver coin with a bullet hole through the middle. He says, keep it close, not for luck, for memory. You nod, ride down the mesa, and for the first time in a long time, you feel not better, but seen. The legend of the ghost of Lone Mesa keeps spreading, and now it includes a whisper.
You've robbed a few trains by now. Not many. Not like those dime novels claim. You never leapt from horse to caboose in mid-gallop, never wore a bandana with eye holes like some bandit raccoon, but you did once hold up a train with nothing more than a revolver and a plan so audacious it nearly got you turned into a hood ornament. This one was different. A job you didn't even plan. It starts outside of Fremont Junction, a two-bit rail town where the saloon is the nicest building and smells slightly less like goat. You're waiting on a contact, never shows, and decide to catch the eastbound freight to the next town. Nothing dramatic, just a ride. Except the train's already in motion when you hop on, and you land not on a flatbed like you hoped, but face first in a crate of pickled onions. That's when the shouting starts. Turns out 3 bandits are already on board. Real amateurs. Shouting, waving guns, demanding gold that isn't even on this route. You peek through the crate's slats and see chaos. A frightened conductor, a crying baby, and one guy trying to use his boot to unlock a strongbox. You sigh, loudly, and step out. They look at you like you've sprouted from the floorboards. You, in your ragged coat, smelling like onions, with your pistol already raised. "Boys," you whisper, "you're about to rob a train that's already been robbed." They freeze, confused. Perfect. The first one lunges. You duck, shoot wide, on purpose, and he drops his gun. The other 2 aren't even aiming right. You step forward, calm, voice like wind through dry grass. Drop 'em, and you walk away. They do. They run. You grab the nearest rifle and toss it out the side. The passengers start clapping, actually clapping. The crying baby even stops. Briefly. The conductor, a stout woman named Dolores, with arms like fence posts, hugs you so hard your ribs protest. "You're a hero," she says. You really aren't. But that doesn't stop the papers. By the time you get to the next town, you're already a legend. "Whispering Jack foils train robbery with nothing but grit and a glare," the headline reads. One paper adds inaccurately, but entertainingly, that you disarmed 3 bandits with your boot. Historians still argue whether outlaws ever acted as heroes, or if such stories were just post-crime rebranding. After all, no one wants to hang the guy who saved a baby from an exploding train, even if he once stole $50 and a mule. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some 19th century trains had robbery drills, like fire drills, where passengers practiced hiding valuables or fake swooning to distract bandits. Apparently, dramatic fainting was a legit defense strategy. You leave town quietly. No parade, no thanks, just a fresh bounty, higher now, and a reputation that's turning slippery. Hero or outlaw? Both hats are getting heavy. You keep the coat and the onion smell, because as you've learned, in the West, sometimes the best disguise is the truth no one believes. You don't read the newspapers, but they sure read you. Every saloon you enter now, someone has a copy tucked under their elbow. A sketch of your face, never quite right, usually too grim or too handsome, stares back at you from headlines that twist your name like taffy. Whispering Jack strikes again. Robin Hood of the Plains? Outlaw with a conscience? One even calls you the gentleman whisperer, which sounds less like an outlaw and more like a very confused poet. It's strange. You're used to folks fearing you, used to the quiet hush when you walk into a room, but now there's something else in their eyes. Curiosity. Kids whisper your name behind their hands. A barmaid asks for your autograph, on a beer-soaked napkin, but still. And a drunk rancher slurs through a toast in your honor, mispronouncing your name so badly it comes out Whiskering Jake. You don't correct him. But all that attention, it's a problem. Because the more famous you get, the harder it is to disappear. And the law, it's not sleeping. You catch wind of a new posse forming out of Kansas City. Hired guns, mostly. A few former Pinkertons, a few bushwhackers who swapped politics for paydays. They're not after justice, they're after notoriety. Chasing you gives them a headline too. One night in Dodge Bluff, you sit outside a saloon, hat low, listening to a pair of men argue whether you can actually shoot a coin out of the air. One insists he saw it. The other bets a month's wages it was a trick. You just sip your drink and chuckle, because the truth is, you missed the coin entirely and hit the bartender's spittoon. Lucky, really.
Historians still argue whether newspaper myths about the Wild West shaped public opinion or simply reflected it. Some believe the press turned criminals into folk heroes to sell papers. Others claimed it was the only way small towns felt like they mattered, by hosting legends. Meanwhile, the press wasn't exactly subtle. One San Francisco paper once printed an article claiming a man survived a hanging by flexing his neck muscles twice. Another said a cowboy lassoed a meteorite. You can't make this stuff up. Except, of course, they did. But here's a fringe detail that might amuse you. In some towns, celebrity bullets were a thing. After a shootout, folks would dig slugs out of walls and sell them as souvenirs. Imagine that, your miss becoming someone's mantelpiece conversation starter. You start wondering who you are beneath all this noise. The quiet kid who whispered to horses, the boy who once wanted to be invisible. Now you're ink on a broadsheet, caught between lies and legends. It makes you pull back. Travel at night, stay off the main trails. You even change your coat, for a while. But the new one itches, and the old one fits like memory. You don't hate the fame, not exactly, but you hate how it makes people forget the blood, the friends buried too young, the choices made in panic, not pride. It's hard being a story when you're still living the middle of it.
You don't trust many people anymore, which makes it all the worse when one of the few you do turns. His name's Micah Dunn. You rode together for over a year. Quiet jobs mostly. Stagecoach diversions, riverboat heists. Once even a dice game hustle involving a fake preacher and a real, very angry goat. You'd call him a friend, or at least you used to. The betrayal starts like most do, slow, disguised as a favor. There's a job Micah sets up. Easy hit, he says, just a payroll coach coming through Dry Lantern Pass. Lightly guarded, predictable route. You've got a bad feeling, but you go anyway. That's the thing about trust. It dulls your edges. Turns out the guards are ex-military. Turns out the pass is a bottleneck. Turns out you're walking into a firing line. You take a round to the leg and tumble down a slope so steep it feels like gravity's had a few drinks. By the time you drag yourself behind a boulder, Micah's nowhere to be seen. Later, you hear the full story. He sold you out. Not for the bounty. No, that would have made too much sense. He did it for a pardon, a clean slate. Said he couldn't keep living like a ghost. Said you'd understand. Yeah, you understood. You don't see Micah again for a long time. But from that day forward, something changes in you. Something quiet hardens. Historians still argue whether loyalty among gangs was anything more than temporary convenience. Some believe the bonds were deep, forged in blood and fire. Others say most outlaws would turn coat if the price was right, or if the hangman's noose looked too close. You tend to lean toward the latter these days. After Dry Lantern, you go dark. Heal up in a mountain shack, courtesy of a widow named Ada, who never asks your name but keeps you in stew and sass for a few cold weeks. She once chased off a tax collector with a pitchfork and a prayer, and she stitches your leg like she's threading a quilt. While you mend, you remember Tanner, the boy who bled out under that mesquite bush. You think about Elijah on the mesa, watching the world passing by like a shadow on a sundial. And now Micah, one more name carved into your ribs. Here's your fringe fact. Some folks in the West believe that if a man betrayed his partner, His saddle would creak at night, even when empty. You've never heard your saddle creak like that, but sometimes you imagine it might. You return to riding with a sharper edge. You don't linger, you don't forgive, and you certainly don't forget. The story of Whisperin' Jack grows darker. Less Robin Hood, more ghost with a gun. You never did get the gold from that job, but you got something else. A reason.
The desert does strange things to the mind. It doesn't whisper like the forests or howl like the mountains. It murmurs. A soft, endless static that gets into your skull and rubs against your thoughts like sandpaper. You've been out here 4 days without proper sleep, nursing a snake bite and a grudge. Both are throbbing, one in your leg, the other somewhere deeper. You've wrapped the wound with an old bandana soaked in creek water and something suspiciously labeled bitters. The label lied. Day turns to dusk, dusk to stars, and the stars, they don't blink tonight. They stare. That's when the armadillo starts talking. He's wearing spectacles, has a little voice like molasses dripped over gravel. He waddles up to your campfire and looks you dead in the eye. "Well, Jack," he says, "you've really stepped in it now, haven't you?" You're too tired to scream. You just nod. He sighs, adjusts his tiny glasses. "You keep running like this, you're gonna forget what you were running from." You stare at him. "A snake," you whisper. He chuckles. "Not that kind." Then he's gone. Or maybe he never was. Either way, you sleep. When you wake, the fever's broken. The bandana's dry. There's a half-buried canteen nearby that you definitely didn't have before. You don't ask questions. This wasn't your first brush with death. Won't be your last. But something about that night sits different. Maybe it was the hallucination. Maybe it was your body finally telling you it's tired of chasing ghosts. Or maybe it was the way the fire crackled in rhythm with your heart, like the desert was trying to remind you you're still here. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of frontier life ever truly faded, even after folks left it behind. Some say the silence broke men. Others believe it shaped them. You think maybe it did both. Quirky fact, some desert tribes used fermented cactus juice as both a medicine and a spiritual gateway. Cowboys called it heaven sweat. You're pretty sure whatever you drank was the off-brand version. You stay in that canyon another day. Let the sun heal you. Let your brain unwind from whatever weird tangle it got twisted into. The wind carves slow songs through the rocks, and you listen. You begin to understand something. Not everything, but enough. You've spent years running from your past, outriding justice, pain, guilt, and the echo of names long buried. But now, lying here under a sky smeared with stars, you wonder if maybe you're not supposed to outrun it. Maybe you're supposed to face it, whisper to it, make peace with it. Even if that means talking to more hallucinated wildlife. You limp out of that canyon with the sun behind you and a strange clarity ahead. Not a plan, but a pull. Something that smells a little like redemption and a little like burned cactus. The hat doesn't fit. Not really. It's too wide in the brim, too stiff at the crown, smells faintly of lavender soap and dried sermon. But you wear it anyway, because for the moment, you're pretending to be someone you're not. Brother Jonathan Mercer of the Traveling Morning Light Revival. Hallelujah and all that. You stumbled across the ministry caravan outside a town called Widow's Crossing, a name that doesn't exactly scream welcoming. You were out of food, out of water, and dangerously low on options. So when the preacher mistook you for his missing brother-in-law, you didn't correct him. You just nodded slow, whispered amen, and climbed into the back of the wagon like you'd been saved. They're a ragtag bunch. 2 actual preachers, a reformed pickpocket turned banjo player, 3 older ladies with remarkable arm strength, and 1 teenage girl who can quote scripture and skin a squirrel with equal flair. They travel from town to town, singing hymns, offering blessings, and handing out soup so spicy it makes grown men cry. You lay low, mumble a few lines from Psalms, avoid questions, and spend most evenings fixing wagon wheels and splitting firewood. Turns out redemption looks a lot like manual labor and very little like dramatic speeches. One evening, during a revival outside Cotton Ridge, a woman steps forward to be baptized. The preacher's busy with someone else, so all eyes turn to you. You panic, step into the river anyway. She looks terrified. You probably don't help. You raise a hand, mutter something about forgiveness and grace, and dunk her under. She comes up sputtering and smiling. Then someone else steps forward, and another. Before you know it, you've baptized 6 people and nearly drowned a 7th. One woman thanks you in tears, another slips you a piece of pie. You start to wonder if this whole redemption thing might be contagious. Here's a historical truth. Itinerant revivalists were common across the West. They brought music, medicine, and the occasional snake. Literally, some practiced serpent handling as proof of faith. Not your thing. You'll take your miracles snake-free, thank you. Fringe tidbit. One revival preacher once tried to convert a gang of outlaws by offering free stew and a tent full of hymnals. They stole the stew and set fire to the tent. He called it a mixed blessing. You travel with the revival for 2 weeks. Eat better than you have in months. Sleep soundly, surrounded by strangers who see you as something other than a name on a poster. But, of course, it doesn't last. One night, a new convert recognizes you, says nothing at first, just watches you a little too long, then leaves a note on your bedroll. I forgive you, but the law might not. You ride out before dawn, hat still on your head. Not because it fits, but because, just for a while, it felt like maybe you could be more than the myth. Even Whispering Jack has to come up for air sometimes.
You don't write often. Words come easy when spoken, but trap themselves in your hands when ink is involved. Still, in the quiet hours, under low lantern light and the scratch of a borrowed pen, you write letters. You never sign them, never even address them properly. But they all start the same. Dear Miss Margaret. She was the town librarian in Pine Hollow, a place you hadn't meant to linger in. You went in for directions and stayed for the way she didn't flinch when you whispered. Her hair was always in a braid that never quite stayed put, and she had a habit of reading aloud to herself when shelving books, little snatches of poetry, sharp bits of history, and occasionally some spicy frontier romance that made her blush when she caught you listening. You shared 2 conversations. One was about the weather. The other lasted 4 hours and ranged from favorite authors to why people pretend coffee tastes good. You didn't kiss her, didn't even touch her hand, but when you left, you felt like something important had happened, like she'd seen past the coat and the gun and into something that might still be redeemable. So now, you write. You tell her about the river, about the revival tent, about the strange peace that came with playing pretend. You never mentioned names, dates, crimes, just pieces. The way the sky looked over Lone Mesa, the sound of wind moving through a ghost town, the way a child once gave you a flower for saving her pa, the way you didn't correct her. You never mail the letters. You leave them in places where they might find their way, tucked into hollow trees, beneath loose floorboards in stagecoach stops, slid between the pages of books at dusty libraries. It's foolish, maybe, romantic, definitely, but it's also something else. Hope. Historians still argue whether outlaw legends ever felt guilt, or whether remorse was a luxury they couldn't afford. Some claim they compartmentalized, locked their sins in a mental trunk and tossed the key. Others believe they carried it all, quietly, heavily, like a saddlebag full of stones. Fringe tidbit: there was a brief fashion in the 1880s for letterbox trees, places where lonely cowboys and travelers left notes, confessions, or lost love letters for strangers to find, like an Old West version of anonymous poetry blogs, but with more dust and fewer emojis. You reread the latest one, then fold it carefully and place it under a loose stone near a dry well. You imagine Margaret finding it someday. Maybe not soon, maybe not ever. But that doesn't matter. What matters is you wrote it, that some part of you is still trying. You mount up and ride before the sun peaks over the hills. Behind you, the wind kicks up, scattering dust, whispering through the trees like a voice half remembered. You don't look back, but you do smile. Just a little. Because somewhere out there, maybe someone's whispering your name for a reason other than fear.
The town's sign still leans. You remember that much. Devil's Grin. Population fluctuating. It hasn't changed much since you last saw it, though maybe the livery's got a new roof and the general store actually has glass in the windows now. Miracles never cease. You left this place years ago, riding hard and fast with fire in your belly and lawmen not far behind. Now you're back, not because you want to be, but because some places cling to you like burrs, because old ghosts get lonely, and because your ma's buried here, under a crooked oak that keeps shedding leaves no matter the season. You tie your horse behind the church, walk slow. The coat's heavier than usual today. Your boots crunch through gravel like gunshots. People stare, but no one moves. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. You're not here for revenge. Not exactly, but you are here for closure. Inside the general store, behind the counter, stands Amos Rigg, the man who once tried to sell your family's mule while your pa lay dying in the next room. He looks older now, grayer, smaller, but his eyes still carry that same sneer. "Well, well," he says, not looking up from his ledger. "Look what the wind dragged in." You don't speak. Just step forward, slow, deliberate. Then place a silver coin on the counter, the one with Elijah gave you, the one with the bullet hole. He glances at it, then at you. "What's this? Guilt money?" You finally speak. Closure. The word drops like a stone in a still pond. You leave before he can answer. Walk past the old saloon, past the jailhouse where you once sat for 3 hours after throwing a rock through a banker's window. You were 9. He'd cheated your pa. You don't regret it. At the cemetery, you find her stone. Simple, weather-worn. Martha Calhoun, beloved. No dates, no frills, just truth. You sit for a while, whisper nonsense, apologies,
Little memories. How she used to braid your hair when you were small. How her hands were always warm even in winter. You tell her you've done some good, some bad, that you're trying. Historians still argue whether returning home was ever safe for known outlaws, or if it was a death sentence delayed by sentiment. Many tried, few succeeded. Most were remembered as shadows rather than suns. Fringe detail for you. Some frontier towns had informal forgiveness councils. 3 or 4 elders who met quietly and decided if someone was allowed to rejoin the community after a season of moral wandering. It was as unofficial as a handshake, and often just as binding. You don't ask Devil's Grin for forgiveness. You're not even sure it's yours to take. But as you ride out, a little girl runs up from the porch of the mercantile, hands you a peach, doesn't say a word. You take it, tip your hat, and for the first time in years, your shadow feels a little lighter on the trail.
You weren't planning on robbing another bank. Not really. But sometimes life has a funny way of dangling irony in your face, like a carrot tied to a stick, and you're the mule, limping toward it, coat flapping behind you like a guilty flag. It's a hot morning in Broom Hollow, and you only stopped for coffee and a saddle adjustment. The town's small enough that the mayor is also the dentist, and the undertaker's part-time accordion teacher. You tie your horse beside the sheriff's post, bold, and stroll into the general store. That's when the scream hits. You duck, instinct barking, and your hands halfway to your pistol when you hear it clearly. They're robbing the bank! You step into the street just in time to see 2 men burst out of the First Frontier Trust, sacks in hand, panic in their eyes. One trips. The other drops a revolver. It's amateur hour out here. The third man, the one waiting with the getaway wagon, starts yelling. Then he sees you, freezes. His eyes flick to your coat. Recognition. Oh no. "Whispering Jack!" he shouts. And that's all it takes. The banker, bless his trembling soul, latches onto that name like salvation. "Help us!" he cries, waving his arms. "Stop them!" You consider walking away. Truly, you even pivot. But then one of the robbers pulls a gun on a woman holding a baby. And suddenly, it's not about money or reputation. It's about a line. The kind Elijah once told you about. The kind that once burned a church. The kind you swore not to cross. So you act. It's not flashy. You shoot the wagon wheel, send it skidding sideways. The horse bolts. One man trips again. Same guy, poor coordination. You yank the revolver from the second before he can fire and cold cock the third with the butt of your pistol. The baby starts crying. You can relate. And then it's over. People swarm you. Cheers, grateful tears. The banker tries to give you a reward, a full $1 and a fruit pie. You decline both. Here's the kicker. You just committed a good deed in broad daylight in a town full of witnesses. And the story? Already growing legs. By nightfall, you're Whispering Jack, the outlaw who saved a baby. Another paper calls you the bandit who can't stop doing the right thing. One brave journalist even coins the gentleman ghost of the frontier, which, frankly, makes you sound like a haunted teapot. Historians still argue whether moments like these, where famous criminals turned hero, were real or just exaggerations. Some say desperation made even villains play savior. Others believe redemption comes in pieces, like a patchwork quilt. Fringe tidbit, a superstition in some towns held that if an outlaw ever protected a crying child, they'd be spiritually unhung, meaning their soul couldn't be condemned no matter the gallows. You don't know about all that, but it's nice to think about. You ride out of Broom Hollow before sunrise.
No note, no reward. Just the peach from Devil's Grin in your saddlebag, and a reputation you never ask for, growing louder than your whisper.
You know something's off the second you step into Dustwater Gulch. It's too quiet, too clean, like someone swept the town for company. You've been summoned here by a message etched into a playing card, an old queen of spades left wedged in your saddle horn. Just 3 words written on the back. Gold teeth. Noon. You only know one man that fits that smile. His name's Lennox Greaves. Last seen bleeding on the floor of a saloon in Fallow Ridge with a knife in his side and murder in his eyes. He was part of a job gone bad, one you barely crawled out of. He always wore gold caps over his front teeth, said they made his bullets fly straighter. You thought he was dead, or at least missing enough parts to reconsider revenge. Turns out, he's been busy. You find him in the center of the street, sitting in a rocking chair like he owns the dust. He's got the same grin, brighter than brass, and a revolver resting casually across his lap. Next to him, an empty holster lies on the ground, an unspoken invitation. "I've been waiting," he says, voice syrupy and slow. You don't smile. "Too bad," he adds. "Wanted you to see the gun that's gonna kill you." He lifts it, a polished Colt with a mother-of-pearl grip and an engraving that makes your spine stiffen, a pattern of spirals and teeth. You've heard stories. They call it the ghost gun. Legend says it once belonged to a gambler who made a pact with death itself. Every bullet fired from it found its mark, but each one cost a piece of the shooter's soul, which is probably nonsense. Probably. Still, you flex your fingers. There's no ceremony, no countdown, just silence. And then, movement. You draw, fire. So does he. You stagger back, shoulder burning. He spins, drops to one knee, clutching his side. The air goes still again. You stay upright, just barely. He groans, laughs. Cursed gun's still got bad aim. You walk over, slow, pick up the ghost gun. It feels wrong, cold. You consider keeping it, then toss it into a nearby water trough. Let the legend drown. "Jack," Lennox gasps. "I wasn't gonna shoot you. Not first." You kneel beside him. You were never good at poker. He smiles. Blood on gold. Historians still argue whether duels like this ever truly happened or if they were just stories built to sell adventure novels. Formal duels, yes, but these shadowed reckonings, these midnight face-offs with loaded pasts, no records, just scars. Fringe trivia for today. Some believe that cursed guns could be cleansed by burying them with a coin under a full moon. Others said you had to melt them down and forge them into horseshoes for blind mules. Your money's on neither. You bury Lennox outside town. Small marker, no words, just the Queen of Spades tucked under a stone. You ride on, shoulder bandaged. The road quieter now. Not because you won, but because some echoes finally stopped following.
The saloon in Bitterwine Ridge has exactly 3 things going for it. The piano still plays, the beer is only mildly poisonous, and nobody here recognizes you. Yet. You're nursing a bruised shoulder and a shot of something that claims to be whiskey but tastes like boot polish when he walks in. Tall, broad, and dressed like a preacher who's lost faith but kept the fashion sense. He's got a harmonica in one hand,
a pistol in the other, and a story in his eyes. You don't recognize him, but he walks straight to your table, pulls out the chair with a squeak that cuts through the piano tune, and sits. "Name's Alton," he says. You nod, slow. "Jack." He grins. "Yeah, I know." Turns out, Alton used to ride with your old friend Micah. Remember him? The walking betrayal sandwich? But Alton left the gang before things turned sour. Said it stopped being about righting wrongs and started being about wronging everything. He orders 2 drinks, pays in coins that jingle with guilt. You talk about regrets, about legends, about how stories get made whether you want them to or not. He tells you he's tired, wants to settle down, open a music hall, quote, "something with seats that don't bleed," he says. You listen, and for the first time in weeks, you laugh. Then, without planning it, you make a pact. If either of you survives long enough, you'll meet again in a town with no sheriffs, no bounties, and maybe, just maybe, a half-decent piano. You'll play, he'll sing, and no one will know your names. You clink glasses. The sound is soft, like a promise made under full moons and fading scars. Historians still argue whether outlaws ever truly escaped, whether they could transform from ghosts into something human again. Some say it's possible. Others say the past always rides 1 mile behind. Quirky fact: in certain towns, piano players were paid extra to pause for drama when famous figures entered the saloon. It was part theater, part respect, and mostly an excuse for dramatic tension. You're not sure if the piano paused for you or for Alton. You spend 2 days in Bitterwine Ridge, play a few hands of cards, talk more than usual, even try the peach pie. It's terrible. And when you leave, Alton walks out with you, both of you tipping hats to a world you've mostly run from. At the fork in the trail, you split. He rides east, you ride west. Neither of you says goodbye. Just a nod, a shared understanding, a whisper of something that almost feels like friendship, built not on trust, but on tired hearts that no longer need to pretend. And just like that, the trail gets a little less lonely. You never thought you'd end up ranching, but here you are. Boots deep in cow pies, sleeves rolled up, chewing a stalk of grass like some sort of caricature of frontier peace. You found the land outside a ghost town named 6 Stones, owned by nobody, claimed by dust and silence. A perfect place to be nobody for a while. It starts with 2 cows. You trade a battered revolver and a half-worn saddle for them. The man you trade with doesn't even ask your name, just gives you a look that says, "You're not gonna make it," and rides off with your gun. You name the cows Trouble and Error, and they earn it. Trouble won't stay fenced. Error seems to think she's part chicken, nesting in the same patch of weeds every night and squawking at sunrise. Herding them is less cowboy and more clown show. But you keep at it, day after day, fixing fence posts, drawing water from a well that sighs more than it pours, and planting enough corn to feed a small army, or a very enthusiastic family of raccoons. One morning, you wake up to find the cows missing and your corn half-eaten. You find the cows half a mile down the trail, arguing with a donkey and standing in a puddle of spilled molasses. Long story. Point is, ranching is hard, messy, humbling. But it's also quiet. and quiet is good. At night, you sit on the porch of the small shack you built, more driftwood than architecture, and look out over the horizon. The stars feel closer here. The wind speaks in soft rustles, not screams. You don't wear the coat every day. Some days you go without a hat. Once, you even left the pistol inside overnight. Historians still argue whether famous outlaws ever truly went straight, or if they simply paused long enough to fool themselves. Some believe redemption came through work. Others say men like you were too tangled in their own myths to ever fully walk away. But here's something odd. In some frontier towns, it was customary to bury your old self before starting a new life. Folks would dig a hole, toss in a token from their past, gun, badge, bottle, and mark it with a stone. They called it ghost planting. You've never done it, but you've thought about it. You meet a few folks out there. A traveling tinker with a rusted wagon wheel, a widow passing through with a mule named Justice, a kid who says your corn tastes like regret, but in a good way. You don't talk much, but you listen. The land doesn't ask questions. It doesn't care what names you've worn or how many wanted posters have your face scowled on them. It just needs mending, watering, patience. And slowly, maybe you do too. You start to wonder if this might be enough. If a man can grow something out of soil and silence and make it mean something. If maybe, just maybe, peace isn't a place you find. It's something you grow.
You're in the middle of chasing a runaway calf. Again, trouble, naturally, when the letter comes. A boy no older than 12 rides up on a mule with knees that creak louder than yours. He's got dust in his teeth and a note in his hand, sealed with wax that's been smudged beyond recognition. You offer him water. He takes 3 gulps too many, then spits out, "Sheriff says come to Bellington. Says he's got something for you." You almost laugh. Then you don't. Bellington is 2 towns east, a place where you once stole a poker pot and left behind a pair of boots that didn't belong to you. You haven't been back since. But curiosity is a tricky thing. It itches at the back of your throat, and before long you're tightening the saddle and cursing softly under your breath as you leave the cows to figure things out without you. The sheriff's name is Calder Beck. You've never met, but you know of him. Used to be a bounty hunter. Walks with a limp from a bullet meant for someone else. Wears his badge more like a suggestion than a command. He meets you outside the jail, offers coffee that could double as paint remover, and says, "Heard you've been doing some good lately." You raise an eyebrow. Say nothing. He sets a folder down on the table between you. Inside, sketches, names, maps. Men worse than you ever were. Robbers, killers, people who burn things for fun. "I want you to stop them," he says. "No killing, unless you have to. No glory, just clean work." You blink. "Why me?" He shrugs. "Because you know how they think, and because the people still talk about you like you're some kind of legend. Might as well use that shadow for something useful." Historians still argue whether lawmen and outlaws ever worked together. Some say it was rare but real, fragile alliances formed in desperate times. Others believe such tales were just fancy retellings of vigilante justice, papered over by folklore. You don't know what this is, but you agree. Not right away, but eventually. And the strangest part? You want to. He gives you a name, a location, a promise. If you do this, no more chasing you, no more posters. Just quiet. Quirky frontier tidbit. In some territories, sheriffs carried 2 badges, one for public wear and a second, confidential deputies. secret law, whispered and wielded in the gray. You leave Bellington with a paper in your coat pocket and a feeling you can't name. Not guilt, not pride. Something in between. Like stepping into cold water just because it's clean. You ride north that night. Stagecoach jobs used to be something you planned from the outside. You'd map their routes, learn the rhythms of their wheels, find the bends in the road where panic could take root. But now, for the first time, you're inside one. Hat pulled low, coat heavy, and a loaded silence tucked under your tongue. The driver doesn't know who you are. Neither do the three passengers. A banker, a schoolmarm, and a salesman who talks with the relentless optimism of a man selling elixirs made of snake spit and wishful thinking. You sit by the window, staring out at the flat horizon. It should be a quiet ride. Should be. But somewhere between Cross Creek and Sparrow Bluff, the coach lurches to a halt. Gunfire pops, horses scream. Someone shouts, "Off the coach," and the salesman is already halfway out the door before anyone else reacts. You draw your pistol. Not to rob, but to protect. Which feels strange, like dancing in reverse. Outside, two masked men, one tall, one twitchy, have the driver at gunpoint. The tall one's barking orders. The twitchy one keeps glancing your way like he knows. Maybe he does. Your name's out there again, after all. You step out slow, hands visible, whisper steady. "Let him go," you say. Twitchy flinches. "That him?" he hisses. "Whispering Jack," the tall one growls. "You gotta be kidding me." You shake your head. No one has to get hurt. The banker squeals. The schoolmarm holds her ground. Respect. There's a long silence. Then the tall man makes the mistake of pulling his aim toward her. You fire. He drops. Twitchy bolts. Trips. Classic. You fire again. Miss on purpose. He scrambles away like a kicked possum and vanishes into the brush. The driver looks at you like you just pulled the moon out of the sky. The passengers are stunned. The schoolmarm walks up and says, "Thank you," like it's a word dipped in disbelief. You nod. Holster your gun. No loot changes hands. No one dies, except maybe the tall one, who honestly had it coming. You help calm the horses, check on the driver's arm, and fix the wheel that caught a stray bullet. And then you vanish before the next town. Just like that. Historians still argue whether famous outlaws turned good men actually stuck to their no-violence vows. Some say it was a PR stunt. Others believe there were lines even in the dirt. And some perhaps tried. Fringe tidbit, some stagecoach lines hired former criminals as guards, believing that only a thief could catch a thief. They called it reverse rustling. The paper the next day is absurd. Whispering Jack thwarts robbery, rescues passengers, possibly flirts with schoolmarm. There's even a drawing. You're taller in this one. You laugh. For the first time in a while, it doesn't feel bitter. You ride out into the dusk, coat flapping, saddle creaking, the dust behind you settling slow. A day ago, you were still trying to figure out who you are. Today, you just saved a stagecoach. Maybe tomorrow, you'll figure out what that means.
Courtrooms are never as dramatic as the stories make them. No thunderous declarations, no pounding gavels or weeping jurors. Just the creak of old chairs, the scratch of pens, and a whole lot of folks trying very hard not to look at you too long. You're not handcuffed. You came in by choice. Bellington's courthouse is small, but packed. Word spread fast. Whispering Jack, the outlaw who stopped a stagecoach robbery, standing trial for past sins. The press calls it a reckoning. The mayor calls it a logistical nightmare. Sheriff Calder calls it A gamble. You call it overdue. You stand beside your defense, a woman named Greta Monroe with a gaze that could start fires and a voice like polished stone. She was a newspaper editor before she took up law, and she doesn't blink when people mutter your name like it's a hex. The charges range from minor to mythical. Horse theft, impersonating clergy, okay, that one's fair. Armed robbery, debatable. And a few assorted counts of general mayhem, whatever that means. Then comes the testimony. People stand up. Folks you've helped, without ever giving a name. The banker from Broom Hollow, Dolores the conductor. Even Alton sends a statement, scribbled on sheet music and delivered by a toothless piano tuner with a surprisingly elegant voice. And then they bring out the spurs. They'd been found in a ditch near your old hideout, rusted, ornate, etched with initials no one could explain. They say it's proof you were there during a robbery that turned deadly. You know the spurs aren't yours, but they look good on a jury's imagination. Whispers fill the room. Historians still argue whether evidence in frontier trials was mostly fiction, fact, or something in between. Some judges ruled based on gut feelings. Others asked God. A few asked the accused to fight a bear, but that may be apocryphal, hopefully. Greta stands, holds up the spurs, and says, "These don't fit his boots." Simple, brilliant. The courtroom chuckles, but the weight doesn't lift. Then the schoolmarm enters. Straight back, steady steps. She doesn't speak much, just says you saved her, that she saw you hesitate before drawing, that heroes don't always wear white hats, and sometimes the whisper carries louder than a shout. The jury goes quiet. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some frontier courts, spurs were actually used to swear witnesses in. 1 foot on the bridle, 1 spur on the bench, symbolizing both truth and tread. Weird, right? Verdict comes 2 days later. Guilty on some counts, time served, community service. A formal pardon, pending completion of a year under supervision. Calder winks at you. Told you it was a gamble. You nod. It's more than you expected, less than you deserve. As you walk out, Greta says, "You're lucky." You whisper, trying not to be. The town watches you go, not as an outlaw, not quite as a hero, but as a man walking his name into something new.
It starts with a handshake, firm, gritty, and carrying more weight than a contract. The governor himself, not that you expected such ceremony, meets you outside a courthouse painted the color of dried mustard and flanked by 2 lawmen who looked like they bench press horses for fun. "Whispering Jack," he says, voice polite, measured. "Or is it just Jack now?" You shrug, still deciding. He nods like that's an answer worth respecting. Turns out your name carries a strange kind of currency these days. Enough that after your courtroom appearance and a growing pile of witness testimonials, the state decides a full pardon isn't out of the question, if, of course, you play nice. Which brings you to today. You're standing on the steps of the governor's office in Franklin City, dressed in a coat that's been brushed but not cleaned, boots scuffed to honest shine, and a pistol that hasn't left its holster in weeks. A photographer flashes your likeness on a metal plate. You blink at just the wrong time. Great. There's no ceremony, not really.
just a document slid across a desk, your signature beside a name you haven't used in years, and a rubber-stamped pardon that smells like politics and ink. You're free, technically. But freedom's never been the whole story, has it? Historians still argue whether outlaw pardons were acts of justice or acts of political theater. Some governors used them to prove mercy, others used them to build headlines, and some, rare ones, meant it. You're not sure which category this one falls into. You're just trying not to overthink the part where your crimes now count as history. Quirky fact, one governor in the Dakota Territory reportedly pardoned a horse thief in exchange for a winning poker hand. The man walked free. The horse never forgave him. The governor asks if you'd consider touring with a temperance group. Speaking to the youth, he says, inspiring change. You almost laugh. Instead, you say you'll think about it. He seems satisfied. As you leave, a reporter tries to interview you, flashes a sketch pad. What would you say to young folks thinking of becoming outlaws? You pause. Tip your hat. Get better boots, you whisper. That makes the paper. Of course it does. Later, in a quiet tavern where no one recognizes you, or pretends not to, you order a drink that's actually drinkable and sit by the fire with the pardon in your coat pocket. It feels like carrying around a hall pass written by the universe, but it doesn't change what's come before. The dead don't rise because a man signs a paper. Still, there's something in you that eases. Just a little. Like a knot loosened. Like a saddle uncinched at the end of a long ride. You step out into the street. No shadows following, no posters flapping. Just night and cobblestones, and a strange sensation creeping in your chest. It might be peace, but then again, peace has fooled you before.
The house is small. Crooked porch, one room, tin roof that hums when it rains. It's nestled on the edge of Big Sky country, where the prairie stretches out like an old story, worn at the edges, still full of quiet surprises. You built most of it yourself. The door frame leans, the windows whistle, but it's yours. You spend your mornings chopping wood and pretending the axe doesn't feel like an extension of your arm. Afternoons are for mending fences and listening to cows chew grass like philosophers. Evenings, you sit on the porch, drink coffee that tastes more like dirt than roast, and watch the light vanish behind distant hills like it's got better places to be. You've been here for months now. No aliases, no fake preacher hats, just Jack. Folks in the nearby town of Greyfeather know you only as the quiet man who sells firewood and doesn't mind fixing squeaky barn doors. Some of them even say thank you. That still feels strange. You've started reading more. Margaret's voice still echoes in your mind sometimes, especially when the wind rustles the leaves just so. You found an old copy of Moby Dick in a crate behind the general store. It's missing pages 43 through 67, but you figure that just makes it more interactive. You whisper the lines aloud, like a spell, like a promise that the past doesn't get to keep all your silence. You tried growing tomatoes. They grew sideways. Then they died. You're better with fences. The quiet is different out here. It's not hiding, it's resting. Historians still argue whether men like you ever truly lived out peaceful years, or if that part of the story is just the epilogue writers slap on to soothe readers. They say myth doesn't fade so much as shift, like boots worn down at the heel. You're not sure what you believe, but the days keep coming. And the truth is, boredom isn't the punishment you expected. It's warm, familiar, like the ache that comes after a hard day's ride. You don't like it, but you respect it. Fringe tidbit for you. In some frontier regions, folks believe naming your ranch after a negative emotion, like Sorrow Ridge or Lost Hope Hollow, would keep bad spirits away. You haven't named your land yet. You're waiting for something that feels right. So far, maybe has a nice ring. You see kids now and again. They play by the creek, skip rocks, laugh like they invented joy. Sometimes one of them asks why you wear a coat in the summer. You just smile. Keeps the wind from forgetting me, you say. They don't understand, but they laugh anyway. And that's enough. You don't carry the ghost gun. You still wear the coin Elijah gave you. And somewhere, buried under a flat stone by the back fence, rests a folded piece of paper with your name written in full. Just in case someone ever asks. Just in case you forget who you used to be and why you walked away.
It starts with a turkey, as most disasters do. You'd been invited, well, pressured, into attending Greyfeather's annual harvest jubilee. A quaint, dusty affair with pie-baking contests, competitive whittling, and exactly one fiddler who knows 3 songs and plays them on repeat. You'd planned to stand in the background, tip your hat, and vanish before anyone made you square dance. Instead, you find yourself holding a rope tethered to a turkey named Captain Clucksworth. Why? Because some well-meaning schoolteacher announced you'd be the guest starter for the annual turkey trot, a foot race between kids, birds, and whatever brave soul decided to try both. The turkey is enormous, mean-eyed, has the soul of a barroom brawler and the dignity of a drunk goose. You're pretty sure he's sizing you up. "Just hold 'em till the whistle," she says. You nod. Whistle blows. Captain Clucksworth immediately takes flight, not up, but forward, yanking you with the force of an idea that's both determined and deeply confused. You stumble, arms flailing, hat askew, boots dragging through pie crumbs and confetti. The crowd roars, not in horror, in delight, because Whispering Jack, yes, someone recognized you halfway through the bean toss, is now being dragged through the center of the fairground by a half-feral bird with no respect for authority or footwear. You recover eventually, barely, end up face first in a caramel apple stand with stickiness in your hair and children applauding like they just saw Shakespeare in action. You rise, bow slightly, and whisper, "Captain wins." The mayor claps you on the back and declares you an honorary citizen of Greyfeather. They give you a ribbon. It's made of yarn. You keep it. Historians, surprisingly, do not argue over the role of turkeys in outlaw redemption arcs. But if they did, you suspect they'd say something like, "Even legends must sometimes be humbled by poultry." Your quirky tidbit of the day. Some frontier festivals held greased pig chases, exploding pie contests, which involved questionable use of gunpowder, and yes, turkey races. In one particularly famous instance, a turkey escaped its handler, vanished into the woods, and reappeared 6 months later, leading a flock of ducks. Frontier life, never dull. That night, you sit on your porch, ribbon still pinned to your vest. Trouble the cow stares at you like she's reevaluating your authority. You can't blame her. But something strange happens the next day. People wave to you more.
A kid brings you a drawing, stick figures and all, of Jack and the turkey. It's terrible. You hang it on the wall. You realize that for the first time, you're part of the town's memory, not as a shadow, but as a story. One that's funny, silly, human. And maybe that's the best kind of myth to become.
You hear him before you see him. The kind of whistle only one man could get away with. A low, slow trill like a snake trying to sing a lullaby. And just like that, the past pulls up a chair. Micah Dunn rides into Greyfeather wearing a grin you'd like to slap clean off his face. He's older now, thinner, but his eyes still shine like someone who's never read the word regret in a dictionary, let alone a heart. You're standing near the post office, arms full of fence wire when he calls out. "Jack," he says, like it's a toast or a warning. "Didn't think you'd still be wearing that ugly coat." You don't answer right away. Just nod, real slow. You've replayed this moment before, in dreams, in fever, in that part of your mind where old fires still burn. He dismounts, dusts himself off like he's just back from church instead of whatever swamp he crawled out of. "I've got a proposition," he says, before you reach for that pistol. You raise an eyebrow. No pistol yet, but it's nearby. Always nearby. He smiles again, reaches into his saddlebag and pulls out something heavy and wrapped in oilcloth. He tosses it at your feet, and it lands with a thud. Inside, a ledger, blood-stained at the corner. You flip it open. Names, places, deals. Bad ones. "Some men don't want you living clean," he says, voice lower now. "They want you silent. I told them you were done. They said they'd come looking, so I figured I'd do the looking first." And there it is, the twist. "You want help?" you ask. He shrugs. "I want to not get shot in the back. Figured you felt the same." You walk with him to the edge of town. No one follows, but you feel the tension like thunder building in your ribs. Then, without warning, shotgun blast. It tears through the grass between you. Both of you hit the dirt. You roll, draw, fire. One man stumbles from the tree line, clutching his side. Another bolts. Mike is already moving, fast and low like old times. You both shoot again, twin echoes bouncing off the hills. It's over in minutes. Micah coughs. They brought buckshot and bad decisions. You don't laugh. Historians still argue whether reformed outlaws ever truly outran their pasts or if the past just waited until they got slower. You're beginning to suspect the latter, especially now that yours has a face, a voice, and a terrible sense of timing. Quirky fact. Some frontier towns held bullet burial ceremonies after shootouts. Folks would dig a hole, toss in the spent shells, and say a few words. Superstition, they claimed, to bury violence. You might start that tradition yourself. You patch Micah up. He stays the night in your barn, an honor usually reserved for trouble and error. You don't trust him, but you also don't shoot him. Progress. The next morning, he's gone. No note. Just a ledger left behind. Open to a page marked with your name. And next to it, a question in Micah's handwriting. Can legends ever rest? You don't answer. Not yet. The library's small. 2 rooms, sloped floor, shelves built from reclaimed fence posts and stubborn optimism. The bell above the door jingles like it's embarrassed to be noticed. You walk in carrying a crate of books, your coat dusted with road miles and dried hay, and place it on the counter with a thud that startles the sleepy tabby cat curled beside the loan ledger. The librarian, Miss June, arches an eyebrow,
She knows who you are, has for a while. But she also knows how to keep a secret, and more importantly, how to keep good whiskey under the counter. "You're early," she says, which is code for, "I didn't expect you to keep showing up." You shrug. Had time. You've been coming in weekly. First it was just to browse, then to donate, and now you're funding half the building's repairs. Quietly. Anonymously. The townsfolk think some eccentric cattle baron has a soft spot for literacy. You let them think that. Margaret would have liked this place. There's a corner shelf you built yourself, polished smooth, stained dark. It holds Western poetry, local legends, a few battered romance novels. You won't admit you read one. Twice. And a single copy of Moby Dick, with pages 43 through 67 carefully rewritten in your own shaky script. You visit schools sometimes now, talk to the kids, not about gunfights or train jobs, but about stories, about how every life is a kind of book, some pages louder than others, but all worth reading. One kid asks if you've ever met Whispering Jack. You just smile and say, "Not lately." Historians still argue whether any outlaws ever truly gave back, whether they built schools, libraries, or funded churches in secret. Most chalk those stories up to fantasy. But Greyfeather has a few buildings now with unclaimed plaques, and no one's asking too many questions. And the quirky tidbit of the day, in some towns, people believed books left open overnight would whisper to each other, swapping stories, facts, even fictional characters. Librarians called it the midnight shuffle. You kind of love that. But this isn't just about books, it's about legacy. You've been collecting pieces of your past, tokens, trinkets, even your old wanted posters, and boxing them up. Some go to Miss June for archiving. Others you burn. A few you bury behind the shack under that old stone with your name scratched faint. You're not erasing who you were. You're curating it. One day you catch a kid tracing your name on the plaque outside the library. He doesn't know it's yours, but he likes the sound of it. "Think I'll write stories like him someday," he says. You don't correct him. You just whisper, "You'd better." Later, Miss June hands you a ribbon, says you've been officially nominated to the town council. You laugh, out loud. It's alarming. The tabby flees. But you take the ribbon, and you start to think that maybe redemption isn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it's about rewriting it, one quiet chapter at a time.
You always figured your last ride would be under a thundercloud. Dust storm at your back, bullets flying, coat whipping like the end of a flag in a forgotten war. But here you are, riding under a soft pink sky, sun low, hills golden and lazy, your saddle creaking not with urgency, but with age. You've packed light, just the essentials: canteen, knife, old coin from Elijah, and a book of poetry that makes more sense to you now than it ever did when you were dodging lawmen. You left a note pinned to the barn door for Trouble and Error's next caretaker, young couple from town, eager to ranch, full of the kind of energy you remember but no longer possess. This isn't a goodbye, not really. You're riding to Quiet Hollow. It's not on any map, not anymore. Used to be a mining outpost, long abandoned, tucked between two hills that fold around it like a cradle. You once took shelter there during a snowstorm, built a fire in an old smithy, and dreamt about a life that didn't involve blood and smoke. You remembered it all these years, and now you return. The buildings are mostly gone. A few walls, a stone foundation, a sign half buried in grass that still reads Q-V, hello, like it's whispering too. You set up camp beside what's left of the church bell tower, now just a frame holding silence. That night you build a fire, brew weak coffee, read aloud to no one in particular. You don't feel lonely, not really. You feel settled, like a river that's finally run its course. You hear coyotes in the distance, the chirp of insects, the crackle of flame. Familiar sounds, friendly. You write one last letter. No name, no address, just thoughts, regrets, gratitude. Fold it. Place it under a rock beside your bedroll. Someone might find it someday, or the wind might carry it off. Either is fine. Historians still argue whether Whispering Jack died in a gunfight or vanished into legend. Some claim he faked his death. Others say he was buried in an unmarked grave beside an outlaw's oath and a preacher's hat. A few believe he became a rancher, a teacher, a myth with a quiet ending. The truth? Well, let's keep that between us. Fringe fact. Some frontiers folk believed that if you spoke your life story aloud under a new moon, the land would remember you, hold your tale in stone and root, make you part of it. You fall asleep under stars that blink like old friends, and sometime before dawn, the fire fades, the wind rises, and everything goes still. They'll tell stories, of course. They always do. They'll find the letter, the stone, maybe even the book with your name in the front, half smudged, wholly earned. But no one will ever find your grave, because it's not in the earth. It's in the pages of the people who remember.
The wind still carries your name. Not loudly, just enough to ripple a curtain, tickle the edge of a campfire, catch the breath of someone telling a story they swear came from their granddad's granddad. In taverns with creaky stools and one-eyed bartenders, they still whisper about the outlaw who vanished without vengeance, without gold, without a single bullet in his final chapter. Whispering Jack. They argue about who you really were. Some say you were a hired gun turned saint. Others believed you were 5 different men taking turns under the same coat. A few swear they met you in a barn, on a riverbank, at a book club in Montana. None of them have proof, but they tell it anyway. And the legend grows. In Greyfeather, a new plaque sits beside the library's door. Just a single line. To those who rewrite themselves. Miss June put it up. She still runs the place. Every now and then she finds a letter tucked between dusty books or slipped through the shutter cracks, all signed the same way. J. The cows, Trouble and Error, have multiplied. Their descendants graze peacefully under skies too wide to hold regrets. The kids who once drew stick figure heroes now teach their own, telling bedtime tales that begin not with once upon a time, but with, did I ever tell you about Whispering Jack? You live on in memory, in firelight retellings, in drawings sketched on the back of feed store receipts. And somewhere, far from noise, Quiet Hollow sleeps under stars, a final resting place with no stone, just wind, just story. People think legends end with a bang, but yours didn't. Yours ended with a whisper. And now, let the dust settle.
Let the sun finally dip below the ridge. Let the stories fade into the hush of evening, where even the wind sounds like it's remembering. You've walked a long trail with me tonight, through saloons and snake bites, ghost towns and redemption arcs. You've seen how a boy with a whisper could grow into a myth, how regret doesn't always mean ruin, and how sometimes the softest voice carries the farthest. Take a slow breath. In through the nose, out through the years. Can you still feel the saddle under you? The creak of the leather? The distant call of a lonesome coyote? The weight of a coin in your pocket that isn't really about luck, but about remembering who you were before the world gave you reasons to change? Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands unclench. You're safe now. No one's chasing you. The past has done its worst and let you live. Let the fire burn low. Let the embers do the talking. And if you listen close, in the hush between heartbeats, you might still hear Jack's voice, just a breath in the breeze, telling you it's okay to start over, to rest, to let go. And tomorrow, maybe write your own chapter, or bury one. The land will remember. You've earned your peace. Now close your eyes, friend. We've reached the quiet part of the trail.